welcome to Solosaurus, a podcast about one-player board and card games. My name is Brandon Wade.
My name is Carter Mackey.
And this is episode 10, where we're going to be talking about the much-hyped Role Player and its new expansion, Monsters and Minions. Rows of numbers and colors have never been so much fun. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. And before we get there, though, we're going to do what we normally do and talk about the news. This is, again, another slow news week. I expect we'll see more big announcements in the next little bit, but for now, we only have two. The first is that Mind Clash Games is running a Kickstarter campaign for Dalgard's Academy, which is an expansion to the 2015 game Trickerion. And this expansion, I don't know a lot about it. I know that it does add the ability for you to have a protege as a magician, which is a neat addition thematically, I think. But the big thing is that David Turczi, the designer of this game, has added in a solo mode as well. And he's becoming a pretty big deal these days. David Turczi has started doing more, not only of his own designs, but he's doing the solo mode for other games as well. I think he's starting to get a reputation as a solo mode developer.
Do you know, how is he handling the solo mode for Trickerion?
I don't know. He came up with a well-loved system for Anachrony, and I presume he's using a similar system there. I know it's AI-based, which is good, but I'm not sure how he's doing it exactly. There haven't been a ton of details on gameplay as far as I can tell, at least that I've had a chance to look at, because the Kickstarter started today, I believe. So anyway, just want to put that out there because a lot of people out there really like Trickerion, and the opportunity to play it solo is very cool. So if you haven't yet, check out Dalgard's Academy. And then the second piece of news is again from David Turczi. He is apparently going to be doing a solo mode for Teotihuacan, which is a game that is a sequel to Tzolk'in. NSKN Games announced that they were creating this game earlier this year, and that's very exciting. Tzolk'in is a well-loved game. It is easily in my top 5 of all time. This new game is pretty interesting because essentially it has a central board in the middle where you are going to be adding these wooden blocks to build up a pyramid over the course of the game. And I guess matching different icons on the pyramid blocks gives you special resources. So that's cool. So it's doing away with the gears. And then around the outside edge of the board are different worker placement spots. You can choose to move your workers, which are dice, too. You can move them as far down the path as you want, I think, or maybe up to 3 spaces or something like that. But when you go forward to take a spot, you're leaving behind other spots you could have taken along the way, similar to Kaido or something, but just on steroids.
Right.
So it's a neat idea. The cooler idea here, I think, is that every time you take an action with one of your dice, you get to level up that die. So you don't actually roll the dice for your workers. You just use the pips to show what level they are. Okay. And the higher they are, the better their actions are.
Right.
So it's a pretty cool concept, and one that I'm anxious to see how it plays out. I was already excited about it as a multiplayer experience, but now 100% excited since it has a solo mode. So that's Teotihuacan. That's coming out, I think, sometime in the end of summer, early fall. It's going to be before Essen. We should see an English release. So that's exciting because normally with these sorts of things, we see the German version come out at Essen, and then we wait a year to get the English version in print here. So good on NSKN for not making that happen this year. All right, though, that's all that we have for the news this week. So we're going to get right into the review for the week, which is for Role Player. Role Player came out in 2016 from Thunderworks Games, and designer Keith Matejka. I think that's how it's pronounced. It's for 1 to 4 players. It's a dice drafting and placement game that uses the interesting theme of rolling a character for a D&D style, pen and paper RPG. You have these player boards with the traditional D&D stats like strength and dexterity and constitution. You're trying to draft dice that will add up to the stat numbers you want for the type of character you have. So you'll get a class, you'll get a moral alignment, you'll get a backstory, and all these things provide parameters that you'll need to meet in order to become the best version of that kind of character you can. In that way, you gain points to win the game, right? So it's sort of a mix between a theme that's traditional kind of Ameritrash, and a Euro, right? A very puzzly dice drafting, dice placement Euro. And then the Monsters and Minion expansion takes this game and expands on it to include a monster that your group can fight with the character you're creating, and minions of that monster you can fight along the way. It adds special kinds of dice and things like that. So both of these have been very popular. The new expansion is the hottest selling expansion at Cool Stuff this month.
Oh, really?
Like by a mile. So very big sales numbers for a game that's not a gateway level.
Right.
Not super heavy, but certainly in that medium category. So interesting to see how many people have responded to this.
And how long ago did the expansion come out?
The expansion just started coming out to Kickstarter backers maybe 3 or 4 months ago, I think, at this point.
Okay.
And just hit retail in the last month or two.
Okay.
So this is very new, but a lot of you enjoy role player out there, so we want to get this out to you as quickly as possible. And so we're going to talk like we always do by starting with the components for the game. And the components here are very high quality.
Yeah. Yeah. Nice, thick cardboard, good graphic design, and art, I would say.
Yeah, I think the art for the entire game is really, it's cartoony.
Right.
And it's not blow you away good, but it's really solid.
Yeah, it's solid art. The dice are nice and chunky, and there's just so many of them.
Yeah, they're not custom dice or anything. They're just, in the sense that they're just dice with, normal pips and everything. But they're big, and they're like fully square, kind of sharp edge dice, which you don't see used that much anymore. A lot of companies tend to like round off the edges of the dice a little bit.
I mean, they're not like casino sharp.
No,
edge,
not casino, but they feel really satisfying in your hand.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And it comes with a ton of them in several different colors. So when you first take this thing out of the bag and pour out all the dice, it feels like an embarrassment of riches. I felt like Scrooge McDuck diving into his pile of gold. It's so beautiful. And they come with a bag, like a drawstring bag to put the dice in. And so when you go to pull out the dice that you're going to draft for that round, it's just, man, it's such a satisfying tactile experience for me.
Yes.
The cards that come with the game too, very thick, linen finish, nice looking cards, a mixture of normal size, like poker size cards and little Hobbit size tiny ones. And then player boards that look like D&D character sheets with little holes that you punch out that hold the dice that you draft.
Right.
And the whole thing, when it's on the table, has a pretty cool table presence, I would say.
Yeah. I'd also say it doesn't take up too much room. It's like, it's very containable. Yeah,
especially for the solo game, which we haven't mentioned yet, does come in the box. This isn't a solo variant. The base game has a straight beat your own score variant in the box. The expansion adds a win condition to that. And so all the stuff we're talking about today is already in the box. You don't have to look it up on Board Game Geek. And if you're playing solo, it's a very modest amount of table space, quick setup time. And that's partly because of that, like the bag that they give you that comes in the game. All that stuff really helps.
Yeah, playing it solo, I could easily fit it on my desk to play. I didn't have to go to the kitchen table or anything. It's pretty manageable.
And the setup time is quick as well. So, I mean, it's a great looking package. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And then the rules, too, I think are pretty well written. You get a really deep game here for not that many rules. Like 12 pages or something, and it's got pretty clear examples. There are a lot of moving parts in this game, but it doesn't feel like I'm trying to hold a bunch of rules in my head. That's not what makes it heavy. It's definitely the puzzly nature of the design itself.
Right.
My only complaint with the rules is that when you're playing with the expansion, the setup becomes a little more awkward because you have standard setup rules for the normal game in the base game rulebook. Then at the end of that rulebook, you have tweaks for the solo version, which happens, right? That's pretty standard for a lot of these types of games. In the expansion, they don't just reproduce all the setup rules. They sort of tell you, set up the game like in the base game, and then do this, this, and this differently. And then at the end of the expansion rulebook, there's a little bit that says, okay, now when you're setting up for solo play, set up like you would for the base game solo version, and then make these tweaks here. Oh, and include some of these tweaks from the expansion rulebook. Basically, you're going to have to look in 4 different places in order to complete the setup for a solo game with the expansion. I don't love that.
Yeah.
But there's a pretty easy solution to this. So somebody on Board Game Geek has also apparently had this problem and create this really handy sheet that just has, here's how you set up the game if you're playing with just the base game multiplayer. Here's the base game with the expansion multiplayer. Here's how to play the base game solo, and here's the base game solo with the expansion. So it's a really nice all-in-one sheet kind of thing. I would say that is essential for a smooth setup experience.
Yeah, it makes it much easier and faster.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And for a game that in every other way is streamlined in that way, I would say this was the missing piece here for me. So It helps that that's available online. So the components and the rules are really solid. And then we come to the play of the game. Carter, what do you think about the way this plays?
I really liked it a lot. I was surprised at how, just like thinky and crunchy the whole thing was through. I mean, I wasn't expecting it to be straightforward and easy, but or just like kind of a lightweight game. But yeah, it had a really satisfying heft to it without getting too bogged down.
Yeah, and more, that's what I want out of a game. I'm not that impressed with heavy games that are just heavy because they have big rule sets. I don't know. I don't feel like combing through 60 pages of rules to come up with a satisfying experience. This crams a lot into a little. Every decision you make seems to have sort of a cascading set of consequences in a really satisfying way. And what's interesting about that is all you're doing on any given turn is pulling 3 dice out of a bag, rolling them, and then putting them in ascending numerical order in front of you. And in the solo game then, all you have to do on your turn is pick one of these 3 dice, put it somewhere on your character sheet. Because of the backstory card you get at the beginning and the class and the different cards that you're dealt at the beginning that define your character, you have goals you're trying to meet with the numbers on the dice and the colors you get. And so that gives you some guidance for where to put it. But what seems like a pretty simple set of parameters quickly melts your brain trying to figure out, okay, where is the best place for me to put this? Because there's rarely just one ideal spot.
Right. And also you have to kind of think about the future, because where you put that one die determines what special ability you get to manipulate one of the dice that you already have down. So either you can flip a die upside down, or you can increment it up 1 or increment it down 1. You can switch 2 dice places. Yeah, and so thinking like, okay, well, I can put this here for now, and then later when I take this spot, hopefully, then I can switch these 2 around. And so, yeah, it's just very, very thinky, just kind to weigh what is probably the most likely to turn out, well for you, and kind of hedging your bets.
Yeah, each row of your character sheet, your strength row, your dex, your constitution, each one of those has a special ability so that as soon as you place a die in that row, you activate that ability. And like you mentioned, one of them lets you adjust the number up or down, which is cool, but another one lets you entirely flip your die to the opposite side. And what is really neat about that for me is that suddenly means that taking a 1, for instance, when you're drafting, is actually better in some ways than taking like a 3. Because when you're looking at your character sheet and the goals that you're trying to meet, higher numbers are generally speaking better. But if I have a 1, I can more easily manipulate it to become a 6 because I have that opportunity to flip a die. Then with a 3, suddenly I'm sort of caught in the middle, and flipping it will get me to a 4, right? It's not going to get me as far as I need to. I don't know. It just made a game where you just roll dice and pick one for your turn could very easily have become a very unsatisfying experience.
Right.
But it's like they gave you every possible tool with very limited uses for each.
Right. Because there's only 3 spots per attribute that you get to invest die into.
Right. So at least as a general rule, you only get to use each of those stats 3 times in the course of the game. So suddenly you're trying desperately to like hold on and save them for when you really need them. I don't know. It just makes it a really crunchy experience.
Right. And that's always in tension with trying to hit your attribute goals, because that gives you victory points for the end. If you get your strength up to like 18, or you get your intelligence between 14 and 14 and 17 or something like that, or trying to get your colored die in the right spot to get extra bonus points that way. And so it's just weighing all of those things.
Yeah, because you have goals to like hit each row of your character sheet. You want to hit a certain range of numbers, the sum of those dice. Plus, there's another area that gives you points for each row. Like they want you to have a specific color die in one spot of that row. Then your class card gives you an extra point for every die of one particular color that you get. And then you're also balancing that with, for instance, gold dice. There are yellow dice in the bag that you can draft, that when you place those, it give you 2 coins that you can use to buy some equipment with. And 2 coins in this game is significant. Sometimes you just need like a little bit of an influx of cash to get to buy a thing that you need to in the next phase, and that might trump the number that you're shooting for your particular row. And that's interesting because at some point you suddenly realize, I can't do everything I want to do. And then the puzzle becomes, how can I squeeze the most out of this system? That's what makes the game fascinating to me. So that is a really cool, interesting puzzle that they've created. And all of those different parameters for your character are variable. So that'll change from game to game. And your class card gives you an extra little special ability. So it gives you another tool to kind of tweak things as you go. Really like that. That's sort of the core of the game right there, is that draft and placement puzzle. But then that's made even more interesting by the fact that the next phase, after you place your die, there's this market of cards in front of you where you are taking whatever gold you have, and you have the opportunity to buy either a skill for your character, which might give you some special ability that you can use for the rest of the game once per turn, or armor cards, which will get you more points at the end of the game depending on how many of each set of armor you have, weapon cards that give you abilities, and then these cards called trait cards that will usually just get you more victory points if you meet a certain condition at the end.
Yeah.
And the decision there of what card to buy is excruciating often.
Yes, absolutely. Because you have 4 choices and you can only pick one. And basically, whatever cards you don't choose, they're just gone for that game.
And that kills you because sometimes you can see 2 cards that would work perfectly for your character. Or if you're playing a multiplayer game, you could see one that would work really well for your character and one that would work well for somebody else's. And you could sort of hate draft that.
Right.
And that's eliminated in a solo experience, but the tension is still very much there for the solo player.
The tension there is in choices, and then also with the solo variant, the higher, like, so there's 3 die, like you said, listed in ascending order, and if you don't choose the very first one, which is the lowest of the 3 dice, then you have to roll another 6-sided die. And based on that number, it might eliminate a card from the market row, which then you're kind of like, well, I really want this card, but how much do I want this one die that's high value?
And that's such an interesting decision that's not really present in the multiplayer game. Or I guess it is present in the sense that if you pick the lowest value die during the draft phase, you'll get to buy first in the market phase. In the solo experience, that tension works itself out then by just saying, yeah, I could take this low one and definitely get to buy whatever I want to. I could take the better one and just maybe it'll be left. Maybe the dice will go my way. And that adds a randomness element there that is a calculated risk on your part.
Right.
It would feel unsatisfying to me if there wasn't the choice on your part to take a lower one in order to get the stuff you want. I don't know. I just think adding that little wrinkle here is a really smart design decision that makes the solo experience feel tense in a way that's similar to the multiplayer,
yes,
even though it's not exactly the same.
Right.
So I really, really enjoy that. And I think we're going to talk here for just a minute about the way the base game works specifically without the expansion. If you're just playing the base game, your choice in the market phase is either buy a card or discard a card and get 2 coins. And when you're playing the base game, that doesn't always feel great because the money economy is pretty tight in this game. There'll be plenty of turns where you can see stuff you want and you just can't afford it. And so your whole market phase is just, okay, well, I'll discard a card and get the 2 coins. That's not that exciting, I guess. It doesn't feel like a cool thematic thing to do in a way that, buying armor for your character who is a gnome barbarian,
right,
with a chaotic evil alignment.
Yeah.
I don't know. It just feels like as you go during the course of the game, you're fleshing out your character more and more. Just choosing to get 2 coins doesn't feed that in the way everything else seems to.
Right.
So that doesn't feel great there. But when you get the expansion, suddenly you have a whole nother choice before you. Because the expansion of this game takes all those interesting decisions that we've talked about so far and then adds several more. And the most interesting one, I think, is here in the market phase. Because now you have the choice to either buy a card, discard a card for 2 coins, or go hunt a monster. And that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
That suddenly jazzes up the game in a whole new way, because if you're playing with the expansion, at the beginning of the game, in addition to all your character parameters and everything, you pick a monster for the game. And there are, 4 or 5 different monsters included here?
Yeah, something like that.
Each one of them has its own, special amount of health and a special power that it has. And then you have a deck of sort of lesser monsters, minions of that monster. And you can choose to take the character you've got and roll dice to try to beat one of its minions. And your base number of dice you're going to roll is always 1. But on each minion card, it'll say, when you fight this, add 1 combat die for every dice you have in the strength row or the charisma row, or for every red die you have or green die. And if you feel like you're doing well enough and you meet that parameter well enough, you might get an extra 3, 4, or 5 dice to roll, sometimes even more than that.
Right.
And essentially you just take all those dice you get, roll them, and if you beat the character's health, you get either experience points, or you get money, or you might get the ability to do more damage to the final monster at the end of the game. And the trick here is that there's a little bit of risk involved in this, because you have like 3 tiers of beating this monster. On the first tier, usually you'll get a small reward, but you'll also take an injury, which, if not taken care of, at the end of the game will make your damage against the final monster less. So if you don't roll well, you've got that hampering you for the rest of the game. But if you do roll well, you can get a ton of awesome rewards, including this adds experience points, which are these little clear cubes that you can exchange for more combat dice, or the ability to re-roll a die, or things like that. So
and you can use them to use one of your attribute abilities again, even after that row is filled.
Oh yeah, which is super powerful.
Right.
It costs a lot of experience, but the ability to flip one more die in your character sheet is huge.
Yeah.
In this game. And so I really like this, because not only because you get those rewards and you have something else interesting to do during the market phase besides buy a card or don't, but then also they add this really neat system in where if you beat one of these minions, you get a chance to learn a little bit more about the final boss. So if you kill a minion, you can flip up one of these 3 cards that sits next to the monster card on the desk, or on your table. I play on a desk. And it will tell you, okay, the monster's location. Or more about the obstacles that you might face when you fight this monster, or more about the kind of attack it has. And thematically, that's very cool. Mechanically, the way it works out is, if you look at one of these cards, it'll tell you, hey, when you fight the final monster, you'll get to roll an extra combat die for every green die you have in the charisma row, for instance. So basically, it just gives you more things to puzzle out for your character sheet, which doesn't sound like a big deal. But having one more thing to hold in your head while you're plugging in dice, suddenly it just makes the whole system more interesting.
Right.
Because you want to be speccing your character to do well against this final monster, because at the end of the game, after everybody's finished filling out their character sheet, you're all going to get a chance to do damage to this big monster. Or if you're playing solo, you alone will do this. And as a solo player, if you can't kill this monster, you're going to lose the game outright. I think it's pretty easy to beat the monster if you do even a little bit to try to gear yourself that way.
Yeah.
But if you can sort of overkill it, you get a number of victory points based on how much damage you do to this thing, up to like 8 more points, which is really significant in this game, where a really good score is like around 40 to 50.
Right.
So it's a pretty big deal. And I don't know, that whole system to me adds another layer of excitement maybe that's just not present in the base game.
Right. I mean, I never played the base game, but I can't imagine ever playing it. Like, I think I would think it's a good or like a solid game, but I think I would probably pass on it ultimately. But this makes it so much more fun, just having those couple more options, a couple of more little small systems. It just really, really complements everything well. And for me, it would just be a necessity for playing this game.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. I mean, I hesitate to say necessity in the sense that I think if you buy the base game, you can have a lot of fun with it. It's puzzly and it's got a lot going on. But like, I actually owned the base game before. We got this copy as a review copy from Thunderworks, which we're very appreciative of. And I enjoyed Roll Player when I had it before, but I ultimately sold it because I didn't think there was enough to bring me back, even though there are lots of little, tweaking the parameters from game to game is great. I probably played it, I don't know, 10, 15 times. Mm-hmm. And it was a fun time, but I ultimately felt like it had kind of run its course. When you add in this expansion, the thing it adds that's not present before is excitement and chance, which I don't normally love, especially in a Euro game, but because it's all chosen risk and easily mitigated risk, I don't know, it just adds this whole nother layer of depth here that would definitely keep me coming back. So I wouldn't say it's necessary in the sense that you can't have a good time with the base game, but it is, if you want it to be fun for a long time, you really need the expansion. So,
yeah. I mean, it's a solid game. I don't think it would be enough for me to make the purchase personally without the expansion.
But the expansion adds even more, though, than just the monsters and the minions, which alone is a huge deal. It adds more dice, adds a ton of new cards to the market, which is a really interesting thing because that's one of the most compelling pieces of this game is buying those cards. And then it also adds boost dice. And boost dice are interesting because basically they're dice that have, one side might have 3 or 4 pips on it, but one side of it has like 8. Mm-hmm. And when you're trying to meet one of your number goals, that's a big deal, getting an 8 die. But the trick is that they are clear, so you can't meet any of your color goals with these dice, but it's super helpful with the number thing. So that adds a really interesting kind of choice there for you during the drafting phase. Plus, they look awesome.
Yeah.
I mean, they look really cool. So that's another nice little thing. And of course, I mentioned this before, but having more of those cards is great because all the new cards that the expansion adds interact more with the minions and monsters and combat side of things in a way that makes that market more interesting and gives you more skills to work with in particular. And for me, skills that you buy are one of the most interesting parts of this game because whenever you use one of these cards that gives you this special sort of action, you tap it basically. And then using it shifts your moral alignment, which is neat because you get this little card at the beginning of the game that tells you if you're evil or chaotic evil or neutral or whatever. And there's a cube on the card that shifts around this little grid as the game goes by based on the skills that you use. And so you may want to use a skill over and over and over again, but at the end of the game, you want that little cube to land in one specific moral spot in order to get, 3 points.
Right, because the alignment will be like individualist or I can't remember some of the other ones, protector and things like that. Yeah. And so that will give you basically a victory point goal for if you get in one spot, you get 3 points. If you get in spots that are kind of close but not there, you only get 1 point. But if you're in the opposite direction, you get negative points.
Yes. And the trick there is, too, like, you don't want to end up in those negative spots, but you don't necessarily want to go right to your goal spot either, because every time you use one of these skill cards, it shifts your cube a little bit. And let's say your cube it moves to the right and it ends up against the border of this card. If it can't move any further right on this grid, you can't use your skill. Right? So it's like you want your morality to be shifting during the game and to finally end up in the place where you're supposed to be. I don't know. It's just a neat concept, and having more cards that manipulate that little puzzle too is just awesome.
Right.
So yeah, that pretty much covers the play of the game and the main ideas that exist there. Replayability here, I think, is very high.
Yeah, I would agree. I would say it's pretty high.
When you look at the box, it comes with a lot of different races in the box, and I think that can give you an impression right there that there's a ton of replayability here, but I think it's a little bit more subtle than that, because having asymmetric player boards in a lot of games is what gives you a real sense of that things are different from game to game. The races here are not very different at all.
Yeah, very, very minor subtle differences.
Yeah, I mean, you get a different picture on the board of your race, and otherwise there's not a special ability that comes with it. It's just I get +2 to my stats in my strength row with this race and -2 in a different row.
Right.
So it's super small stuff. Not totally insignificant, because it does affect how you play the game, but it's not going to be enough to keep you coming back.
Right.
And all the cards that you get that determine the parameters for your character, each one of those really is just a small tweak. Ultimately, what makes this game replayable, we had a longer conversation about this before we started recording, it's really the sum of all those things.
Right. And I think for me, maybe a little bit more is the alignment, background, and race. They're like subtle little things that add replayability, but it's really the marketplace that makes it replayable for me, because, I mean, most of the cards are pretty significant as far as how they change, as far if you're getting weapons, the new abilities they give you, having skills, and how those skills work into what you're trying to accomplish, what your end victory point goals are, and how that affects how you play through your game. It makes it a very different experience, where one game you might go very skill heavy, and the other game I just completely ignored skills.
Yeah, I've done that a couple of times, just not getting any skills because I felt like I wanted my moral alignment to be just right. I didn't want to have to toy with moving the cube around too much. But if you do go after skills, it can be super powerful and give you nice ways to manipulate things on the board. I don't know, the balance of, I agree that the market is really dynamic and interesting, and the choices that exist there are great, even in solo. I love that push your luck aspect.
Right.
The variability of the cards there, even among just one subset of the kind of cards. Like the variability among skill cards is really interesting. The variability among trait cards. If we only ever got expansions from here on out that just added more cards to that deck, I'd be totally cool with that.
Yeah, I think that'd be good. I don't know if I would be totally cool with that.
Really? Okay.
I don't know. I don't know what I would want in an expansion, so maybe my opinion doesn't really matter.
I don't know that it needs a lot more. I mean, this expansion added so much. I don't know entirely what you could do to add more, but just getting more of those items is good. Well, I guess the more I think about it, if you add too many more cards, you run into the problem like you have, in my opinion, with some of the Suburbia expansions where, in Suburbia, you have tiles that are powerful when you get other tiles of that type in your city. And when they added expansions, it diluted the pool of tiles so much that those tiles just became less interesting. I'm afraid that would happen a little bit here because the armor sets that you need in this game, you really need to see multiples of the same set come up for them to be worth a purchase.
Right.
Right now, I think it's at a good level where you may or may not have the opportunity to buy every item from a set. So there's always a bit of push your luck there.
Right.
But it doesn't feel like I'm only ever going to see one item in the set too. So I don't know. It feels good right now.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I would say the cards that affect your victory points, as far as like how many victory points you can get at the end of the game, it normally feels pretty quantifiable. So it's like you can normally pretty well like estimate, okay, like this card would net me this many points at the end of the game, and this other option would net me probably this many points. So I feel like most of it's like there's some luck and risk in some of the choices too, but also the way everything's distributed now, you have I feel like a pretty good idea of what some of the cards will net you in the end.
Yeah, I think so as well. And so the replayability here, I think between the small additions that you get for your player board and your class and all that, between that and the market, you have a highly, highly replayable game here. And the fact that the expansion also adds the excitement and randomness of dice and what that's going to look like from game to game, to me, is also interesting stuff. I mean, the minion deck that you play with, the monsters you fight during the game, you only use like 2/3 of that whenever you play any given game. Same with the market deck. You take off several cards. That's great. You know, not seeing the same cards every game is wonderful. So I think you've got a highly replayable experience in this box, which leads us in then to our final sort of summary where we talk about the things that are good, the things that are bad, and the things that are ugly. And man, there's a lot of good in this game.
Yeah.
The components are outstanding. The rules, you know, being streamlined and simple, but offering a lot of depth in the gameplay, the puzzly nature, but combined with the excitement of the dice and fighting the monsters, it's just a wonderful package for me. I would also add too that the replayability being so high is a plus, and the fact that as a solo experience, you have that win condition that comes with the expansion and the beat your own score thing is nice. Also, this is a small thing, but beat your own score variants, if it's just me keeping track of my score and trying to beat that, that's almost never compelling for me. This is a dumb thing, but if you give me a tier of scores that says, like, if you score 30 or below, you're a beggar, right?
Yeah,
and if you're a 40 or higher, you're an adventurer. This has one of those scales in the book. I always loved that.
Yeah, it's silly, but yeah, it does make a difference.
It does. And that on its own is good, but having that win condition too, for me, I think the solo experience is excellent here and quick, easy to set up, but crunchy.
Yes.
You know, it's all the sweet spots for a solo game for me, so that I could not only say it's highly replayable over a long period of time, but also when I first got this game, I was playing it I played it like 3 times right in a row, you know, not the same night, but 2 games on the same night and another game the night after that because I just wanted to, and it's easy to hit the table. So for me, all of that stuff is going in its favor. It's a fun, thinky, puzzly, quick game, and those are a rare breed. And really, there's not much bad about this game.
For me, not the only, but I guess the main bad thing of playing the main bad thing for me was keeping up with what your current attribute score was. And I mean, if you can do math really quickly in your head, I'm sure that's fine, but it just became a little tiresome to constantly have to re-add up things, to math out, to figure out, okay, does this need to go here? Can I tweak these numbers? Where? Just trying to do all those quick little calculations with the choices you have and figuring out what works. Having to constantly look over and try to remember what it is. It became tiresome. And so I just started writing it down on a piece of paper. I mean, it's not the most elegant solution, but it made that much easier.
I was thinking, I agree with this 100%. At the beginning of the game, it's not a big deal, really, but toward the end of the game, when you've got just a few spots left and you're trying to figure out where you can put this die to maximize its potential, you end up adding up the totals of your rows, sometimes multiple times in the same turn, because you can't remember from one row to the next how much it was. So having a piece of paper there is a simple solution. A cool solution one day would be, I think, a small rondelle for each player. Yeah. It might be overkill, but I don't care. I think it would be neat to have a little rondelle that similar to like what you see in Glass Road, that has maybe an icon for each of the different stats and a little needle for each stat that just you adjust each one as you go up. So it has, 6 different needles, and It would just be some kind of mechanism, some kind of tactile mechanism to keep up with the stats would be really nice. It's not essential, right? I mean, it's still fun. It's not a game-breaking problem or anything. Right. But when you've already got enough things to manage, you don't need the requirement to keep doing the same math over and over again.
Right.
If you could remove that, it would just make the game better for me too.
Right. It's not a meaningful mental load to have to add on.
And the other thing I would say is the fact that you need that player-created setup aid, I would put that in the bad category as well. I mean, the fact that the setup aid exists is great, but dividing up the setup for the solo game with the expansion in such a way that I would need to look in 4 places to set it up is problematic. Otherwise, the rules are great, but that is a gripe that I have for sure.
One other, I guess, kind of bad thing for me was I like immersive games, and I really like the theme of this game, and is very much there in the beginning for me. But I would say the last third of the game, the theme has completely evaporated, and it is just numbers, figuring out formulas, optimizing. I've completely forgotten everything about my supposed character. I'm just trying to get as many victory points as possible.
It's sort of an odd situation because I've experienced this as well here. It is a thematic game. Like all of the, maybe not all of, but most everything here makes thematic sense, ties in with managing your alignment and using a certain skill that might shift your moral alignment. Together, those things that make sense that like a thievery skill would push your alignment more toward evil or chaotic or something like that. Like those thematic touches make sense, but like you said, by the end of the game, there's just so much to manage. You just can't remember the theme is there anymore. Almost, it's like there's just you don't have brain space for it.
Right. All I'm thinking about is trying to get as many points as possible.
Yes. We mentioned Zolkin earlier in this episode. I would say, for me, this game is on the same brain-burning kind of level as Zolkin.
Oh, God, no. Zolkin's so much worse for me.
Yeah, I think that's going to differ for everybody. For me, there's just so many little things to take into account here. I just feel like my brain melts down. And in a way, for me, that's maybe even worse than Zolkin.
I see, that's so funny, because for me, this game, it never felt like overwhelming. I had to think a lot. But like Zolkin makes my brain melt to where I feel exhausted at the end of a game.
And that's how I felt at the end of playing this. I felt totally just kind of spent when we played our 2-player game. It's not as bad, I think, when you're playing solo.
Yeah, it's not quite as bad.
Because you're not trying to beat the score of another player. Maybe that's it. You're not working as hard to wring out every possible point.
Yeah.
But yeah, for me, it definitely was brain melting in a way that can certainly distract from the theme. So, yes, this is kind of an odd point here, but it is one worth mentioning that it's a thematic game, but you sort of forget that it is.
Right.
By the end.
Right.
So, if you are coming at this game for the theme, just know that exists. And I think you'll do better if you approach it as a Euro. I mean, this is, if you think about it like a Euro game, if you like dry Euros, you'll definitely like this. Mm-hmm. If you like thematic Euros, it'll be enough to pull you in for sure, at least at the beginning. Just don't expect to feel it all the way through.
Right. Yes. As thematic as designing a character can be.
Right, exactly. But, this does take one of my favorite things about pen and paper RPGs and does turn it into a game. I mean, you DM for a D&D game.
Right.
So you really like the whole experience.
Right.
And I do too. But there is something really cool to me about the character creation part. Always has been.
Right. Yeah.
And I do love seeing it come to life here.
And I guess that's where I really kind of feel the theme evaporating at the end, because that's what feels great about making a new character is like, oh, I have this character now and I kind of understand their backstory and what their like motivations or just like whatever like general tropes you want to put onto the character are. And yeah, all that's, I don't think about any of those things afterwards.
Yeah. And yeah, which is not a fault of the game really. Right. It's just so you know, I mean, the RPG thing only goes so far because it's still a board game.
Right.
And anyway, as for the ugly in this game, I can't think of anything.
Yeah, I don't really have anything on my side either.
This is one of those games that when I first heard about it a couple of years ago, I thought, what a neat idea for a game. Like, how has nobody ever thought of this? But then it's such a cool idea that you almost expect that it's going to be mismanaged, as cool themes so often are.
Right.
But this is the perfect marriage of a really interesting idea for a game and a really smart designer. The system that Keith Matejka, if that's how you pronounce your name, Keith, has created here is really compelling and interesting for me, and does exactly what I want in a game. Short setup time, short play time, few rules, but man, a lot of depth to explore here.
Yeah.
So all that said, then I think this is going to be a game that we give our stamp of approval to. I think I like this game more than Carter does.
Yes.
But I love this game. I think this is one of the most interesting designs I've played in a long time. It won't leave you awake at night trying to rethink everything, I think. But I think it's the kind of game that does stick with you and you realize, oh, I could have managed this bit better about my game. You know, I could have done this little thing differently. I don't know. It just comes together in a really interesting way for me, and I wholeheartedly recommend it. Now, we make this stamp of approval with a caveat. The base game on its own is good, but it really gets the stamp of approval because of the expansion here.
Yeah.
It really elevates the whole package to another level.
Yeah, this is definitely a game that I know like you like it more than I do, but I still really enjoy this game. I would definitely play it again solo or with other people. I liked it a lot either way. So yeah, it's just a game I just really, really liked a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of people are going to wonder or ask how this compares with Sagrada, which is another game that has very similar mechanisms. It's also dice drafting, also placing different colored dice of different values in a grid, only to make church stained glass windows instead of to create a character. And Sagrada is a gorgeous looking game. I have not actually played Sagrada. Based on what I've seen of it, it looks much more like a gateway experience than this. This is 100% not a gateway game, for sure. Gamers have a tendency to think something is a gateway game that is definitely not for normal people anyway. And I would say as a gamer, this is 100% not a gateway game. Sagrada may be. I can't speak from personal experience, but just based on what I'm seeing, this is a more in-depth, crunchy kind of experience. And you need to consider the theme here too. You know, if you're planning on playing this with other people, in addition to playing solo, you might want to consider that something more abstract or kind of benign, like creating stained glass windows, is going to appeal to a wider group of people than creating a pen and paper RPG style character.
Right. And also just thinking, even people who do like role playing and tabletop games, sometimes all they like is the role playing and they don't really care about the numbers and mechanics and rules. And so this theme still might not work for them.
Yeah. But if you're just buying it for a solo experience, I could tell you that 100% this definitely gets the stamp of approval for that.
Yeah.
Even if you only ever played this solo, it'd be totally worth the money. So that's what we've got for you this episode. Hope you enjoyed the review. If you haven't yet, go ahead and stop by our Facebook page and rate us there, follow us there, see what we're doing. You can follow us on Instagram at Solosaurus Podcast. And if you haven't yet, go on to iTunes and give us a review and rate the show there. The more people who do that, the more we can do with the show, and the more people will discover it. You can also email us at solosaurus@gmail.com if you have any comments or questions. And otherwise, until next time, my name is Brandon Waite.
My name's Carter Mackey.
And this is Solosaurus.